So hello and welcome. I'm Becca Harding and I'm chairman of the Society of Women Writers and Journalists. And this is part of our up close and personal series of interviews with authors. It's great to have you all joining us today. And I know that we have many people from different countries watching too. So welcome to you all. Today I'm talking with Sita Brahmachari. Her many projects and writing commissions have been produced in theatres, universities, schools and community groups throughout Britain and America. Artichoke Hearts was her first novel for young people and won the prestigious Waterstones Children's Book Prize for 2011. Nominated numerous times for the Carnegie Medal, and she's won the International Board of Books for Young People, nominated her book for the Tender Earth for the UK honour for writing. She is not afraid to tackle the difficult issues that young people face in her writing. Sita lives and works in North London, and her husband, 3 children, and a temperamental cat. So we'd like to know about your cat, I think, really. And can I also apologise to anyone who's listening, because I've just had an operation on my mouth, and if I'm slightly unclear, I do apologise for that, because I know people that normally watch our interviews are used to me being quite clear in what I say, and it's quite difficult at the moment. It isn't coming out quite right, so apologies to everyone. I will do my very best through this interview. So Sita, welcome. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really well, and I just think you're so brave doing this interview. You've had this operation.
I know, I've got a mouthful of stitches at the back, so certain sounds sound a bit strange at the moment. They're not. Yeah, I'm sort of stumbling.
As much as we are all okay in these very strange times that we're living in, so it's really lovely to be chatting to somebody.
Yeah, before you get out. So tell me about your writing. So how did you start writing? You did English at Bristol, but that doesn't always mean that you go on to become a writer. So tell me about what's actually got you writing as opposed to just reading.
Well, I think it's very strange, really, but I did English at Bristol, and I was a voracious reader by then. But when I was a child, I was really quite slow to learn to read. And I was one of those very kind of, up in the air, in my own imagination children. And I used to kind of lived in the Lake District at that point, and I used to love the natural world, the rivers, and composing poetry. And I really wrote before I could read. And it was a period of time where, and actually I've discovered lots of authors of my age did this thing. It's called the ITA method of learning to read, which was probably a disaster in getting people to learn how to spell, which I still can't spell that well, but the spell check there. But anyway, it was a phonetic way of spelling, which meant that you could read and you could lay your thoughts down on a page really early, before most children can, because they're worried about putting words together and how words are formed. So I used to write books. I used to write loads and loads and loads of stories. I used to write poems. I couldn't read a word, but I was writing, and probably no one else could read what I was writing anyway. But I was expressing myself on a page. And I really loved that feeling of like, oh, that river sounds like this. I'm going to try and capture it on a page, even as a very small child. So I really have always been writing since I was very little.
That's amazing.
Didn't have much confidence really though about I didn't show my writing to many people. My father was from India. He passed away in 2008. My mum is from the Lake District where we were living, and we would sometimes go to India as children. And so it was a really different world. The very rural village in the Lake District with a village school, with my mum's family there, and then we'd go to Kolkata with my dad's very large family, artists and dancers, and you'd suddenly be, just walking down the street in Kolkata in a very different world. So very early on, I started writing travel journals just for myself.
Oh, right. Excellent.
I know. It was just, and I still got those travel journals. Yeah. And in fact, my second novel, Jasmine Skies, there are little vignettes of what I wrote when I was about 12 in that novel.
Oh, that's amazing that you still got that writing.
Still got the writing. And the first thing I did, like many of my students, I wrote a diary. And my first novel, Artichoke Hearts, was written in diary form. So I was just one of those children that was always writing. And we'd laugh in my family. There's 4 of us. I'm the second girl, and then my brother, and then my younger sister. And they all laugh at me because for my 13th birthday, I got a reading chair. I mean, my brother says that is so dull.
I know.
Who could have a reading chair? It was a rocking chair. It did have a bit of movement in it. But I wanted my own place. By the time I really got into
Yeah.
reading, I wanted my own place to read. And now look where I am, in the grand surroundings of my writing teepee.
In the attic. They keep
In
us
the
in the attic. I don't know any writers who aren't in the attic or like me in the cellar. It's like they put us to the extremities of our properties.
Yes, I'm not Mrs. Rochester. Basically, my little writing room, it should be a shoe cupboard. And I think this is a great metaphor, because I really think, writing is stepping into the shoes of other people's experience.
Yes.
And to get into my writing cupboard, I literally have to crawl in, and then I can sit up. And then if I was to stand up, I knock my head on the ceiling. So I think I was such a dreamer as a child that's what took me into stories and writing. And then I had this huge sort of storytelling family. My gran was a great storyteller. My dad was a great storyteller. Obviously, his stories were from India. So it was that. I always say that writing happens in the spaces between. Everyone thinks, oh, sit at your desk and do this. But yeah, of course, there is a discipline to writing. But I think as a child, my imagination was really fed by the stories that my dad would tell and the way that I imagined them. And then when I went to India, they were grounded, but actually it was in the imaginary sort of liminal space that my storytelling sort of mind sort of started to grow. But I wasn't that good at English at school, and early on, I couldn't spell, still can't spell very well. But I had this sort of sense of really wanting to express something, but not being able to do that in English, because in a way my imagination was much bigger than my abilities in writing. And I think a lot of children have that sort of feeling of frustration. And so it's interesting that I now write, primarily for children and young people. So I think I've stayed very much with that, the potential of who you are when you're growing up as a writer, and the sort of rawness of how it feels wanting to express yourself but not being able to. So and then I read loads, and then I went to English to Bristol, but I never thought I could be a writer. I never.
You've obviously been very successful at it. But I was going to say, when you had your lovely little writing chair, which I think is a wonderful idea for kids, not reading chair, I mean. What was your favourite book? What did you love reading? What writers inspired you as a child?
Okay, so growing up sort of in the Lake District, we read a lot of sort of, the Beatrix Potter and all of that kind of stuff. But my dad also used to tell us stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and that was such a different world. So again, I was sort of like, from Mrs. Tiggywinkle, to the story of Rama and Sita and Hanuman, and these big epic stories. So I had like both in our. So I read, I read very widely. I really loved the Brontes, and because we didn't have this thing called YA literature, or young adult literature, or we didn't have that stepping stone from Mrs. Tiggywinkle to Wuthering Heights. It was just Wuthering Heights.
Yeah, it was. At 12, you read Jane Eyre, didn't you? I remember that.
Jane Eyre. Yeah. And I love that. I love the grimness of Jane Eyre, and I love the the coldness of and the tragedy, and I loved all of that. I really liked. So I sort of think, we had that, and it didn't ruin us to become really sort of grim sort of people. And I think children and young people quite often want to step into the sublime, the ridiculous, the dangerous, because then you've gone there in your storytelling, and you can sort of practice about how you might react in real life. You wouldn't want to go there, but I think that is one of the functions of reading at that age.
That's really interesting.
So I used to read that, and I also really love poetry. I love poetry, and again, my siblings would sort of put people reading poetry if I'm reading chair. But it did seem a little affected, but I just literally I loved the rhythms in poetry, and I would read poems. I love Ted Hughes, and I love Wordsworth and Keats and the romantic poets. I was very romantic, and Joanne Manley Hopkins and writers like that, but also Rabindranath Tagore. So I was kind of exploring the Indian heritage and quite often I couldn't really understand what was going on at all. I loved Shakespeare, but later. But I couldn't really understand what was going on. But what I loved was read the rhythms.
The rhythms and the sounds. Yeah. Yes,
it was like
I understand that. Yes.
Um,
Yeah. No, that's
so
really interesting. It's interesting that you're already sort of interested in, it's a young age in sort of the whole Indian background, the heritage there, and your dad was obviously telling you stories. So is that is storytelling part of the Indian culture? Is that very much part of
I think it's in some families. I mean, it was. I don't want to sort of speak generally, but I think, yeah, the whole sort of, you know, if you go onto a stage in the Madan, say, which we went to when we went to Calcutta, you'd have the kind of the storyteller, you know, opening the show and things like that. I mean, I don't think my dad really presented it like that. He was just a good. I mean, from the way I experienced it, he was just a good storyteller. And he would, and the other thing that I think has really influenced me is the way that my dad spoke in English, because he was a doctor, and because we were born here and brought up here, and he always had this thing about us wanting his children to speak what he called Queen's English.
Yeah.
And I suppose it might have been because of discrimination he'd faced or whatever, or he wanted us to fit in. I don't know exactly what it was, but he had that idea. And he spoke English with this beautiful, nuanced sort of lilt. And sometimes he would put words in different orders, and I was fascinated by that as a child. And now that I work in a refugee centre, and we, myself and Jane Ray, the illustrator, we run an art and writing club. And sometimes the way that people put things, because they're reaching for language, because English isn't their first language, is so extraordinarily beautiful, and it's so what writers search for in their own work. You know, one example would be okay, my dad was talking to me about the moment of partition in India, the point of Indian independence. He was a young doctor in Kolkata, and he was asked, I was asked by my medical officer to go into the trains in Howrah station. Peter, you have to imagine the chaos there, because, you know, there were people moving all over, you know, Muslim people, Hindu people, Christian people, Jain people, before they were friends, before they were neighbors. Now this cut happened in our land. I was a medical student. I went into Howrah station, big station in Calcutta, like King's Cross station, you know, same architecture like this. I went in, there is, you know, hurly-burly everywhere, people shouting, people crying. I go into the train, I see amongst all of this turmoil, I see a girl, she is giving birth to a child. So I've never delivered a baby in my life. So I go over there and I help her deliver her child. And I still remember, I pick this child up, and it is a boy child. But when I look at the young mother, I see there is no breath in her mouth. And so I take this child in my arms, I leave the mother here, I take the child in my arms, I walk through Calcutta, and do you know, still, I can smell the blood from this pavement. Do you know, Sita, blood smells the same in every religion.
Oh my goodness, what a story.
Yeah, my life was full of those stories. So I always say, and that is done with the greatest respect to my dad, but I always say that in some ways it is the gift of this heritage that has made me into a storyteller. And the fact that I was quite a quiet child and I was listening very carefully to what was said and what was not said.
No,
and people say, oh, Sita, you'll tackle so many things in your writing. But I do, you know, children are living in the world. They are experiencing everything that is going on. To not tackle it is to create more anxiety, I think.
No, absolutely. Treating it as though it's okay when things aren't okay. What issues do you feel, because your books do deal with this mixed heritage background, and you're unusual in that in your writing. So I read somewhere a review where they were talking about how young girls at a library, I think it was, really loved your books because it gave them, they felt they could relate to it. It gave them something. So what do you feel the issues are for those children? What are they facing, and how do you try and help them through your books?
So I think, you know, the things that girl, I mean, it is true that girls, I mean, I write my books for everyone, but I think sometimes when I speak to girls in school of many different backgrounds, there is this kind of sense of really, really wanting to express something about themselves which is wider than the society kind of allows. And that can be people from all different backgrounds, and in all different societies. But so there's this sort of sense of containment. And then when they see somebody maybe like a little bit like them, or maybe when I say tell my dad's story and I say, well, this is a heritage that I have, you may have heritages from somewhere else, and I said, that storytelling, that's what storytelling is. It's like something clicks in them and they go, oh, I could be that. And so there's this sort of aspirational gap that I think so many young girls have about what they are and what they could be. And I think it's so ingrained that they don't understand it, but they feel it.
Yeah.
And so when they see someone like me who says, well, I was really quite shy at school and I wasn't maybe the best at English earlier on, but I wrote stories and I wrote diaries and I wrote travel journals, and I really thought about things like, strange things like, what does it feel like to my dad to think about home when he wasn't born here? And I start, really frankly saying these things, and you can see that they're like, oh my goodness, that's what a writer is. That's what a storyteller is. I could be that. I've got that map.
And probably having those thoughts, I would think, as well, about their grandparents if they're young, or parents. Yeah, I think it's difficult for, and it's not something you hear expressed very much or talked about very much, actually. About how it feels.
Yes, there's teachers who watch the sessions that I do sometimes, or librarians sometimes say it's really amazing the impact it has on the children who are usually on the edge of the room, or the children who generally want to disrupt.
Oh, interesting.
They are really drawn into this narrative because I think they see their own cultural currency, and I don't mean that in a sort of financial. They see the worth.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
And value
who they are.
Yeah, who they are. And they didn't really, and like myself, very much like myself, I didn't realise that all that I had in terms of my heritage and my dad's storytelling, I didn't see that in books. It wasn't there. I mean, I was reading the Brontes, but there wasn't this whole sort of swathe of YA literature to choose from, and there wasn't this sense of those stories should be in books. And I think subliminally, I've heard people say, well, it doesn't matter. You don't go into books to look for yourself, which is very true. You don't. You want to find other experiences. But it does have a kind of subliminal effect whenever you read a book, when you never ever find something that is a little bit like, you never see your dad like yours or granddad like yours. It does kind of matter, and it has a sort of impact on you, even if you're not conscious of it, to say, maybe this isn't a place I really belong.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So, I mean, with your first book, Artichoke Hearts, you won the Waterstones Award, which is a pretty phenomenal accomplishment. So you're doing something very, very right. And you've been nominated for these other awards that I mentioned earlier as well, the International Award, the UK Honour one, and also been nominated for the Carnegie Medal. How does that make you feel? I mean, did you ever think that you'd achieve at that sort of level? Going from a little girl who couldn't write and doesn't spell well.
It's really strange because I think, and this is, I speak to enough women to know that this is the case, and I think it's really sad actually that so many women who are really, like, I could have started writing before, but I just never had the confidence to do it. So Artichoke Hearts I wrote in secret, really. My youngest child, Esha, who's now 16, was in nursery, and I wrote it in the 2.5 hour gaps when she was in nursery over a period of about 2 years. Well, she was in year 1 by then, but yeah, so I was writing it, and I didn't really show it to anyone. And eventually, when I did show it to my husband, he went, "Oh my goodness, you've written a novel. You should really send it out into the world." And I hadn't even thought about that. I just was writing it, and so it was such a shock when it was something that was received by the world, because I so wasn't expecting anyone to be interested, and that's actually really sad, and it's the opposite of what so many of my male colleagues say. I think I thought everyone should listen to it, and I think that's something quite interesting about writing in that girl context, is that I think that's something that girls really recognise. But then when it was published and won the Waterstones Award, for a while I was like looking behind me, going, "Who are they talking about? Who are they talking about? Is it me?" I even actually thought, did I actually write that? And then I have been commissioned ever since to write, and it has been an astonishing an astonishing journey. And I feel really honoured that you know, people are moved by my books, and I get letters and you know, not just from children but from adults as well, to say thank you for writing that. And I do write. I mean, I would say I pretty much write from the guts and the heart.
Yeah, no, I've definitely got that impression.
I'm shooting from that basically, and I do spend a lot of time on crafting my words in order to convey that.
Yeah.
I have a real love of language and storytelling and words, and so once I've shot from the gut, shot the first draft of the story out, which is not fit for anybody to read, but because it's just guts and hearts on a page, then I'm working on the craft of the words and the threading the story together, and it's a kind of magic. And I have to say, one of the things have failed in completely is giving writing tips, because every single so teachers will quite often say to me, or writing groups will say, can you give me your tips? And I was like, every single book I thought I knew what I was doing, and then I got completely lost, and then I sort of found it again, and then I got lost again. And so yeah, there's no formula. The only thing that I would say is every single book that I have written and every arts process that I've been involved in is because I've been really passionate about telling that story, or actually, in the first place, understanding something. So I think in the first place, I do kind of try to understand something myself before I can craft it,
express it.
Yeah.
But it is that passion that comes across in the writing, and it's probably what makes you so successful. You know, it's because people can really sense what you're trying, that the feeling's there, and it's the feeling
you know the
that moves
symbol of the
people.
artichoke? Have you ever heard of the symbol of the artichoke? Because this is the artichoke. I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, it's
silver
pretty.
Charm.
Yeah.
And this is the charm that my very lovely husband gave to me when I won the Waterstones prize. And it's the charm that I made up that is in the book.
Yeah.
And it's the character of Nana Josie is loosely based on my mother-in-law. So it's Leo's mum. And so he was so moved by this depiction. And he had this charm made for me, which made me his most hated author. And the symbol of the artichoke is, the grandmother says to her grandchild, you know, love is like an artichoke. You know, and people are like oxygen. As people grow up, they grow tough little layers around their heart. But most children have open, trusting hearts. And so, you know, when you eat an artichoke, you don't eat the outside layer, you have to peel it and go in, and you get to the heart. And she says to her granddaughter Mira, try not to grow too many tough layers.
I think that's a whole webinar or interview in itself, is talking about our tough layers of our hearts.
But basically every single character that I have, that's what I do. I actually check out what the layers are. I know the subtext. I know what made them like that. And then I get to the heart of them. So one of my editors asked me if I could write a baddie, and I went, well, they could look like a baddie at the beginning, but by the end they probably have something.
You'd find out why they'd grown those layers. Yeah. That's so interesting. I love that. It's characterization, isn't it? But it's visualizing those the impacts and how it's affected people. It's really clever. I love it. So you do lots of different genres. You slip from novels to plays. A lot of people can do that. How do you manage it?
Actually, I have, because I started my work in theatre, so in community and education work. Yeah. And so actually, up until I did my work with the RSC in 2003, I was working theatre, and so sort of that's where I'd written in youth theatre and those sort of. So it's in some ways it doesn't feel that different, because my focus was with young people and on young people in theatre.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I wrote a play called with a group of children from in Camberwell. I'm in a stage in Camberwell. I wrote a version of The Tempest with them. And so, in a way, when I go in and do a workshop now, say, or a writing workshop on one of my books, it doesn't feel that different, because you're interacting with young people who are taking something that you've had, an idea that you've had, and exploring it for themselves. And in essence, you know, once the book's gone, you know that that's what young people and readers are doing. They're kind of taking it wherever they want it to go. So I don't see that as that different. I I did an adaptation of Sean Town's The Arrival with Christine Landon-Smith and Tamasha Theatre Company. And that's if you don't know this novel, it's a graphic novel, and it's basically about the experience of migration into America. But the man in the hat in the story really reminded me of my dad. And so I emotionally connected to it first. And then we went on this amazing journey because we worked with Circus Space. And so the whole, it was amazing. I sort of scripted it, and there was a musical score, there were actors, there were circus artists. And when they got to the point of how does it feel to, go from your homeland to another place and start life again, which is, the experience of my own family, but also the refugee people that I'm working with now. And there's this young circus artist who was right at the top of this pole, and there was this moment, and he was saying, "Papa, Papa, I need to say goodbye. I need to say goodbye." And then just suddenly, that was all the script was. He just fell from the top of the pole, boom, to the bottom of the pole, because that was his skill. And he picked up a paper bird, and that's when the piece started. And it was so exciting.
Oh my goodness, that's so amazing! Yeah,
collaborative storytelling. But in a way, even though I'm sitting in this teepee, when I'm writing, I'm always collaborative in storytelling. So I'm always thinking of a child that I've met, or when I wrote Tender Earth, which was one the EB Honor thing, a girl in the school, I've been telling her that I didn't find characters or stories like mine when I was a child, and she was in a wheelchair. She had cerebral palsy, and she said, "Miss, can you write my story?" And I thought, I don't know. So I said to the librarian, "I'll come and work with her and see whether I can do something." I'd love to, because there's so little depiction, of children with disability in wheelchairs in stories. And she didn't want to be the kind of character on the side. She wanted to be the central character, quite right. Anyway, that's how I came up with the character of Kezia. So while I'm sitting in my teepee, I'm really kind of still collaboratively thinking about these children who might need stories, might want stories. I'm certainly not in a kind of tokenistic way of that person isn't represented, but just because somehow, you feel what it must be like to that particular young person. She had a wheelchair in school, and she had she wasn't from a particularly wealthy family. She had a golf ball, which someone had stuck onto this kind of quite decrepit wheelchair, which she was having to maneuver her way around on. And so we did this whole session, which was dreaming her perfect mode of transport. And so that's where we comes in Tender Earth, which becomes an Indian chariot. And she was so thrilled when she read that. But I was just sitting in my teepee with my imagination and not knowing that context. I could never have created it. So I do see all of these works as collaborative work.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting about the disabled little girl using. One of my best friends uses a wheelchair and has done since he was a very small child, and it's so interesting seeing his point of view about things. So I'm really glad that you did that with her. It's really good. And
I'm learning every group, like Aisha, Somali refugee child that I interviewed. A whole year I worked with the writers group in the East End, and I learned so much. When I'm writing.
I can believe that.
It's very, it is okay. It's not likely to make you the wealthiest person in the world, but in terms of lifelong learning being something that is really an extraordinary thing, writing these books has taken me places and made me understand certain things that I never would have understood if I hadn't been writing them.
Oh, that is really. So do you find that sort of real life input's what keeps you motivated and keeps you writing?
Yeah, I think connections to people. I think it's actually quite So writing this book and spending so long writing it and thinking about it and doing the work of writing and the craft of writing, which is at your desk, crafting. One of the great things when a book is published is to go out and to meet children and to hear what they think once they've read it, or and what the things that they're interested in. And very often they are not the things that you think that they're going to pick up on. And it gives you such insight into what you've written. And quite often you only really fully understand what you've written when it gets in front of your readers. And I know that that is a great thing about being a children's and YA author, because you get the feedback. And sometimes they can be really blunt. "Oh, I really didn't like that character because," or "Why did you do that?"
I've got 2 teenagers, and you have to have thick skin. They definitely bring you down to earth on a regular daily basis.
Or they will so incredibly sum up what you've been trying to sum up for your publicist or whatever that you haven't really been able to, about what the book's
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, they just say it like that.
You go, okay, thanks, you be the writer. But there isn't that now at this moment. So I have to say I am really missing that. Yeah.
Oh, I know it's difficult, isn't it? Not having that contact to get the inspiration for writing, I think, is very hard. It makes you a bit lethargic, doesn't it? I think a lot of people have said that.
The Refugee Centre in Islington is obviously online as well now, and we're meeting people as much as possible who have online if we can do it. But you know, I think keeping contact with, you know, the lovely things in the real world, but also the truth of what is going on in the world today, not in terms of reading the news, but in terms of actually meeting people. And last week I noticed that the big issue sellers that I consulted with when I wrote Red Leaves, which is set in Queenswood and Highgate Wood, just up the road from me, they were back selling again. And so knowing how your work is reflecting, even if it's not set in today's world, like my last novel was set in the near future, knowing how it's rooted in the consciousness of today is really important to me. And knowing that there's, at least for me, it's not, you know, it can't be everyone's truth, but at least for me, that I've managed to capture a truth that I've seen, and hopefully that will kind of spread out to other people.
No, it's interesting. So with your new book, which has obviously come out just very, very recently, really recently. So, and it's come out to great reviews. It's called When Secrets Set Sail. And there's adventure in there. Oh, look, she's got it in front of her. Excellent, excellent. So, and it it's an adventure. It deals with historical issues and current issues in society. I mean, tell us all about it.
Okay, so this story, again, I say that, you know, the ideas for the stories come a long way away. So I was interviewing some South Asian elders in a nursing home near the Barbican for Midnight Children about partition, and I told you my dad's partition story. And so some of the members there had dementia, and so I was talking to one man about partition, and another lady was saying, "Don't forget the ayahs, don't forget the ayahs." And the carer kept going in and telling her off and saying she's not talking about. I don't know anything about the ayahs. So of course I went to find out, and I discovered that there was a house in Hackney that had been the ayah's home. In fact, 2 houses in King Edward Road in Hackney that had been home to ayahs, and ayahs were Indian nursemaids who, from actually pre-Victorian times, but around Victorian times onwards until about, you know, the late 30s. Early 40s, they brought children from the Raj, from colonial Raj to England, and they would bring those children to go into the schools or who were returning, and their passage would be paid one way, and they would have travel documents one way, and then the idea is that they would pick up the journeys to go back home. But very often, and in more cases than were ever reported, they never did get that passage paid home. And so they had to wait for a very long time, if ever. And some of them were abandoned, and it was a very, very sad story. Anyway, the London City Mission set up a home in King Edward Road in Hackney, and called the Ayah's Home. And they were missionaries, and they kind of acted as agents, and they looked after them in the house until they could find a passage home for these women, who were mostly widows, working class women, widows. And some of them loved, they had sea legs, and some of them loved the journey backwards and forwards, but others, you can imagine, there's difficulty.
And the cultural difficulty at that time in the 30s, coming from,
I mean, extraordinary, and you know, from Victorian times. You know, Queen Victoria, I was just sent a piece of research where Queen Victoria saw an ayah on the street with no shoes on and noticed. And there's a line in my book where Imtiaz, the young narrator, says they're walking through Victoria Park, and there's Queen Victoria there, and the pigeon's on her shoulder, and she looks up and she says, "Do you think Queen Victoria ever saw this?" The ayah's home just captures my imagination. If you go there in Hackney, then you can see on the cover of the book, it's quite a grand looking building. It's got pillars on the outside, but it's kind of, you know, lived in accommodation now. But it's got a real atmosphere, and of course, I love a ghost story. So
Why
my
not?
imagination. So I sort of imagined like I knew I wanted to write a story where it was contemporary children discovering this history, and with everything that's happened with Black Lives Matter, I was at Bristol University,
Yeah.
and there's Coulson statue coming down. I mean, I was writing this before all of that happened, but I was at Bristol. I used to walk down, Black Boy Hill and White Ladies Road and think, well, this is history that's not properly kind of talked of and mediated and understood, and what impact does it have on people? So even as a student, I was thinking stuff like that. But then when I was thinking about what can I write about into this time, which is really about how we're negotiating cultures and histories and religions and our own history and who belongs where and what belongs to whom and what foundation and things have been built on, I thought, oh my goodness, I've got to tell the story of the Ayers home.
Yeah.
And I've got to have it through two contemporary children discovering it. So the quest. So for generations, since the 60s, since my dad's kind of generation came here, the how. This is all my imagination, by the way, because I know I'm a convincing storyteller. So, but this is not fact. This is how I've spun it. The house was a doctor's surgery, and the downstairs of the house was a doctor's surgery, which of course the early migrant doctors, they did go to work in places like Hackney, East London, where the newly founded National Health Service and people really in need after the war and lots of social separation, that's where they went. So that's what the surgery was. That's what the bottom of the house was, and the family's had it since the 60s. There's mysteries around that. And then, but the family is an amazing diasporic family, which is one of the sisters, their adopted sisters, that she calls herself Asian, Black and Asian, and that's their kind of mixture of family history, and it's all contained in this house. And the top of the house was designed by Usha's grandfather, and it has pieces of ships from all over the world on the top there. And so it does have, the amazing adventurous history, but it also has the difficult histories. It may have pieces of history that have not been properly uncovered in this country in the actual house. Anyway, today the bottom of the house is a refugee centre, so the house has always had a history of caring and journeying and travelling. So I've kind of made the Ayers home, for me, symbolically, into something much, much bigger.
No, that's really good, because I mean you've had so much to do with refugees, as you've worked in this home, you've written about it. It's obviously a really important issue to you at the moment. Is this something you really wanted to get across in this book, as well as working with the mixed heritage background and the issues about the nannies coming over from India?
So for me, I say, people talk about, so I've written lots of books now, people say, what do you think is the central thing in your books? And I would say probably equality is the thing that keeps coming through again and again. So I'm always interested in looking at how society serves people and how it underserves some people and it serves some people better. And I'm always trying to do this thing. I discovered it's a thing in Buddhism, where you're trying to go to the top of a hill, it's called upeksha. And you're trying to go to the top of the hill, and you're trying to imagine, it's really hard thing to do, you're trying to imagine that if we were from a future time and we were looking back into our time, what would be the things? What would be the things that, like we say about Nazi Germany, like we say about Rwanda, because I had a Rwandan refugee in Artichoke Hearts. So I've always been interested in this. People talk about the refugee crisis. No, the state of being a refugee is a human state. It's in the Odyssey. So you go to the thing and you look back at the top of the mountain and you look at the things that and I write into childhood, so the things that would be important to write into childhood today, and with 16-year-old children dying on your shores, these are things that in history we look at other people and we go, how did they live through that and not sort it, like as kids would say, how can we be making such a mess? And so those are the things that I don't ignore, because those are the things that, for me, if I didn't ignore them, it would be like I wasn't serving my work of writing into our time. Because I set a book in the past or in the future, I'm still writing in the time I'm living in.
Yeah, no, I completely, and it's such an important message to get across to kids as well, about to get them to think about it. You know, whatever their views, is to get them to think, isn't it? Because they are the future, and we kind of want them to do where maybe our generation has failed in some places. So no,
I mean, I
very,
quite
very,
often have
very
these quite.
valuable.
I mean, I think it probably is an alter ego thing, because obviously I was a bit shy when I was a child. But I have these characters like Shifa in Where the River Runs Gold, who's an environmental activist, and she's very feisty, and she is likely to be, the Greta Thunberg type character. She is likely to be the person that will stand up. And the thing that I think is amazing is that how many young people today are doing the standing up. So I've been writing about children doing the standing up for a very long time. But I think that now that children are standing up, and they have, I mean, there's negatives and positives about social media, that they have a way,
Platform.
they have a platform, and they have a mobilizing ability, which is much greater than a lot of the adults around them.
Because they can work it, we're not very good at it,
Yeah.
not in comparison.
I mean, that can have really negative impact in terms of anxiety and worry, and if things go wrong and you want your adults to be able to hold you. But it can also have extraordinary potential. And I think young people are really showing their potential. So I think it's a very exciting time to be writing these young, feisty activist characters. I mean, they're not all like that, but some of the characters in my books are like that.
So what I wanted to ask you about is the anxiety side, because you've talked about that before, and then perhaps finish with a reading from your new book. But I mean, you said at one point that the truth is there are more and more children suffering from school anxiety and anxiety in general. So what can we do about that? And what are your feelings about that? And sort of how can your books help with anxiety? And
so I've written a number of books, which kind of, in fact, and at some points in most of the central characters, they focus on, without talking about it, you can see that they are experiencing anxiety in the story. So one of my stories, Worry Angels, is really about that. It's set in an out of school centre with a variety of children who are suffering from school anxiety, and so they're looked after by this extraordinary woman called Grace. Who basically allows them to garden, she allows them to do art, she allows them to rip up news with disturbing headlines and turn them into papier-mâché angels. And one of the things that I feel is that over the years that my children have been at school, my eldest is now 24 and my youngest is 16, that the education of our children has become very linear. And so it's been very achievement based, and I think that from experiencing at school, it was less so, and there was much more room to be a kind of child that kind of did a bit of poetry by river or something. And that doesn't seem to be. And if you were a child that did poetry by river now, you might feel that wasn't something that was particularly valued now. And so I think that it's about that. It's going to this thing about so in Kite Spirit, which was a teen novel, very sadly, the end point of this anxiety was at the beginning of this story, a girl who's very high achieving takes her own life. Is a teen novel, and she is an oboist, and she's at the highest level. She's going to be like the chief oboist in the country or something. And out of the blue for everyone else, she seems perfect in every way, and she does that. And the rest of the novel is about Kite, her best friend, trying to understand and uncover this. She never can, because that story is not known. But what she does discover is she discovers how to find her sense of self. And the rest of the novel really is about Kite reflecting on what Dawn has done, who only ever reached her dawn, but also discovering in the course of the story how to find a sense of self. She finds herself like in the Lake District with this strange boy Garth who's making sculptures, and he's going across the landscape and he's picking odd things out of the landscape. But just because he likes the look of them, and he's building them into sculptures, and he's building them into sculptures in the Haweswater Dam, which in that summer that I've written about was drought in the floor of the Haweswater Dam. And Kite says to Garth, "Why are you doing this? Because when the rain comes, it's going to disappear." And he says, "The whole point of making this is that I know it's going to disappear, and that I'm going to know it's there. And because we've become friends, you're going to know it was there, and we'll never forget it." And for me, that is what writing does. But it's also what you need to feel as you need to feel not just as a child, but as an adult growing up. You need to know, you need to be able to check for yourself what the really wonderful, extraordinary things that are happening to you are, and or the difficult things. And you need to be able to look at them, and you need to be able to say, this is a key moment. This is, in writing you say a tipping point, but this is a key moment in my life, and I need to give it time, and I need to look at it, and a bit like a Rubik's Cube, you need to look at it from all of these angles. And I think that the way that the world has moved, the kind of messaging, marketing, social media, is so fast and so reactionary and so reactive. And the fact that for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, the technical revolution has happened. And the technical revolution is the biggest revolution that has happened since the Industrial Revolution. And the adults, who are the carers of the children, are not on top of it.
Yeah, that's true.
The children are more mobile, and they cause every. I mean, you know, I wrote Jasmine Sky because I dreamt of going to see my cousin in Kolkata on my own without my parents. Every teenager wants to do that, but every teenager also wants to know that if it all goes wrong, there's these people who will say, okay, we all do things that are wrong, we get it right next time, we're there for you. But because we don't really understand their lives in the way that we grew up as well, there's a danger there. And so in that story, Kite Spirit, and in Worry Angels, and actually in all of this, including this story, I've had to take the children away from some of that so that they can have the ability and space, dreaming space, to see themselves, and also to know what feeds them. And even if it is a quirky thing, like so the joke in Kite Spirit is that boy Gar is basically doing what the artist Andy Goldsworthy does, and is making beautiful sculptures out of natural landscape.
Yeah.
That boy's actually failed his A-level art. But in my
this is sounding terribly familiar at the moment, having a 16-year-old.
He becomes the next Andy Goldsworthy. So, you know, stories, I think that's the amazing thing about stories, is that young people can feel like, oh, it's ended because I haven't got this result, or I haven't done this, or at this stage. But what you know when you're old, like me, is that just the doors are just there. And then sometimes they're not the doors that you push that you think you're going to push, but the other door can lead you, you know, that road less traveled or whatever, that door can lead you into something so much more, you know, extraordinary for you. And one of the best things that someone ever said to me is, just because you're good at something, it doesn't mean you love it.
Yes. That is very, very true. That is very true. But we're not.
So stories of people, you know, being ASAR in English. I'm going to do English at university. I'm going, is that interesting, actually? I think I want to do something else. So that's my focus about anxiety, is there needs to be much more work done. Gardening space, artwork, create doodling. I doodle all the time. Then there needs to be much more dreaming space given to children and young people. And that's, I think that the cost of not having that space is great.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. Very true indeed. Well, would you like to read to us from your book? So
I hesitated to think what I would read to you now. I was going to read to you some testimony, but we've just been talking about dreaming spaces. Oh, so maybe I should read you something about a dreaming space. Okay. So in this book, one of the things I'm really proud about this book, When Secrets Set Sail, is it tells the story of the Ayahs, these Indian working class women. They weren't all Indian, but the ones that I'm focused on is. And it's mostly told through women telling history. And one of the testimonies that I love is Gladys, who's the cleaner in the house, who becomes the friend of the Ayah. You never hear these stories, and I really love making it up. But I'm going to read you the bit where Usha, who's really quiet and shy, a bit like I was when I was younger, her Kalima, her grandmother, who's a fashion designer and very kind of extrovert, she's died, and she's just laid her ashes to rest on the Thames. And now you get to see what happens. Except that I've got the wrong bit.
That's all right. We'll listen to anything. It's fine.
Okay. Opening the tiny gate, she placed the ashes boat on the water and let go. At the sight of all that was left of her Kalima bobbing alone, Usha had the urge to pluck the boat out again. but it had sailed away out of reach. Through tear-washed eyes, she watched the candle flicker, casting a glowing light over the water as the bunting sail set fire and burnt brightly. "As long as the flame stays lit, you're still here with me, Kalima," she whispered. Behind her, Tansy called out a reminder, "Don't forget the petals, Ush!" Moving as if in a dream, she reached into her pocket. Feeling the velvet softness of the rose petals, she began to scatter them on the water, where they trailed behind the ashy boat. Within moments, the waxen paper began to grow so heavy that the last of the flaming sails met the water, soon to be snuffed out. "Make a wish before the light goes out. Make a wish before the light goes out. Make a wish before the light. I wish that you'd come back, Kalima." It's too late. Her heart sank at the same time as the little boat dipped beneath the surface of the grey river. Usha felt a sudden deadening pang of guilt. Why didn't I wish for Kalima to be at peace, reunited with Cops Michael? She berated herself, and unfurling her fingers, she found the miniature figure of Kali indented into her skin. Usha stared at the murky river, the light was over, and all she felt was a dull ache of emptiness in the pit of her stomach. Her legs collapsed under her, and she sat cross-legged on the floating platform, watching the rest of the water. In the exact place where the boat had sunk, the afternoon sun formed a glistening light pool. The surface dipped, and the rose petals were caught in a swirling vortex into which the sun shot millions of shards of light. Emerald, green, purple, red, and bright yellow spark formed a rainbow across the Thames. Hypnotized by the river's beauty, as if Kalima had created it herself, Usha leant forward to touch the colours on the water. Holding her breath, she squinted into the sun and gasped to find a slender wreath of smoke or steam shooting up from the river, just where the boat had sunk. Only a trick of the light and shadow, she reasoned, as she called closer. But the force of the water builder now spurted violently upward, flashing her, propelling her trembling body back as Kalima rose from the Thames on the shiny grey mass of a whale's back. Frozen to the spot, Usha willed her legs to move, but she could do nothing but stare in horror at the sight of her Kalima, just as she was in life, surging towards her. Cowering away, Usha bashed against the railings of the platform, listed violently sideways, then steadied herself, returning, shaken into the water with a loud thud as the great whale dived down and the rainbow river smudged back into mucky brown. Her heart racing, struggling to catch her breath, Usha turned to find her Kalima sitting beside her. "You're dead."
That's superb. I love it. I love it. That was just great. Oh, thank you so much for reading that. And thank you so much for the interview today. I really enjoyed that. It's been really good. And it's been great meeting you as well and hearing your views.
Really lovely to meet you.
So if you've enjoyed today, to everybody who's listening, then you may be interested in our other online events, especially an interview with Prince William and Prince Harry's uncle, Earl Spencer, which is taking place on the 22nd of September. And he's talking to us about his new book, The White Ship, and its wreckage in 1120, which changed the course of history. So keep a lookout for this event and others on our Facebook page. And if you join the Society as a friend or a full member, then you'll find out about events firsthand from our bulletins. So look on our website for details. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much, Sita. That's been brilliant. Really appreciate your time. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.